There's an unspoken truth about online poker, one that every seasoned grinder has suspected but few want to admit. You are never just playing against the cards, the table, or even your opponents. You're playing against something bigger. Hidden forces pulling the strings, watching your every move, tilting the odds just enough to keep you hooked. This is the dark underbelly of online poker, a place where some of the biggest names in the game have either been caught cheating or worse, gotten away with it. We're about to uncover 17 of the most disgusting scandals in online poker history. And just when you think you've heard the worst of it, oh, it gets much worse. Lock poker promised to be the future of online poker. Instead, it became one of the most blatant exit scams in the game's history. For years, players deposited money, played hands, and, at first, cashed out without issues. But by 2012, withdrawal time stretched from weeks to months. By 2014, some players had been waiting over 500 days to access their funds. Meanwhile, Lock Poker kept running deposit bonuses, taking in new money while failing to pay out the old. CEO Jennifer Larson assured players it was just a temporary issue. It wasn't. In 2015, Lock Poker vanished. Website offline, accounts deleted, millions of dollars stolen. Larson never seen again. The worst part, there was no legal action, no consequences. Just another poker site proving that when the house decides to keep your money, there's nothing you can do. And this wasn't even the most shameless poker site robbery, because while Lock Poker scammed players over time, others did it in real time, right at the tables. For years, poker players had one sacred rule drilled into their heads. If you can spot a tell, you can exploit it. But what if your opponent doesn't have any tells? What if they always make the perfect decision, every single time? That's exactly what happened when a sophisticated bot ring started infiltrating high-stakes heads-up see and go tournaments. The operation was as cold and calculated as the AI running it. A network of Bulgarian-based cheaters used 2 computers per player, one to play the game, the other to analyze every decision with real-time solver calculations. It wasn't just some cheap bot clicking buttons on autopilot. These were highly optimized programs using cutting-edge game theory to systematically dismantle human opponents. The setup was brutal. One computer streamed the poker action to an optical character recognition system, which instantly converted hand information into data. A second machine ran that data through a solver, spitting out the game theory optimal play for every decision. The result? A relentless, flawless poker machine that never misclicked, never tilted, and never made a negative expected value move. Most players didn't even realize what was happening. The bots weren't reckless, they weren't trying to dominate leaderboards overnight. Instead, they played the long game, grinding a small, consistent edge across thousands of matches. Unlike human grinders, they didn't take breaks, didn't get tired, and didn't chase losses. They just printed money. The poker world finally took notice when a whistleblower leaked chats from the botting crew, exposing their methods. The revelation was met with outrage, but also unease. The sit-and-go bot scandal wasn't just about one group of cheaters. It was a wake-up call. It proved that as long as real money is on the line, online poker will never be a fair fight. Humans are predictable, emotional, and prone to mistakes. Bots, they just win. And this wasn't the last time a bot network took over online poker. In fact, another one would go on to steal millions, and the site hosting it didn't just let it happen, they profited from it. PokerStars was supposed to be the gold standard, the site that took security seriously, the one that players trusted. But in 2010, that trust was shattered when one of the most sophisticated collusion rings in online poker history was exposed. It all started in the high-stakes double or nothing sit-and-go tournaments. 10 players buy in, 5 double their money, 5 leave with nothing. Simple structure, straightforward strategy, but also the perfect breeding ground for collusion. And that's exactly what a group of Chinese-based players figured out. They weren't just working together in a few games, they had infiltrated thousands. Players would soft play each other, chip dump when needed, and trap unsuspecting opponents with ruthless efficiency. They manipulated ICM spots so perfectly that they turned a format built for low variance grinding into a printing press for stolen money. One day, a player named Jane0123 took to the poker forums, claiming to be unfairly banned. Then PokerStars' response dropped. Jane was linked to 46 other accounts, all working together. The poker world erupted. These weren't just a few cheaters, this was an entire network, possibly one of the largest collusion rings ever uncovered. For months, PokerStars dragged its feet on payouts. When they finally acted, they confiscated over $2 million from the ring. But how much was stolen before anyone noticed? how many innocent grinders had been unknowingly fed to the wolves for months, even years. And here's the part that really stings: collusion is still happening. Today's poker sites may have better security, but so do the cheaters. The only real question is how many of them are still getting away with it. And if you think playing against a team was bad, imagine sitting down at the virtual felt and realizing you were playing against something that doesn't make mistakes at all. Ultimate Bet wasn't just any poker site, it was one of the biggest in the world. It had Phil Hellmuth as its poster boy, high-stakes cash games that attracted elite players, and a reputation as a place where the best came to battle. But behind the scenes, it was a rigged casino disguised as a poker room. For years, top pros grinded the nosebleeds on Ultimate Bet, only to be systematically crushed by anonymous accounts that played perfect poker. Not good poker, perfect poker. These mystery accounts never bluffed at the wrong time, always made insane hero calls, and had an almost supernatural ability to dodge coolers. Even the best players in the world were getting steamrolled. Then, in 2008, the truth came out. A superuser account had been operating behind the scenes, allowing someone to see every player's hole cards in real time. The mastermind, none other than Russ Hamilton, a former WSOP champion and part owner of Ultimate Bet. For years, Hamilton had been running a scam so brazen it almost didn't seem real. He wasn't just cheating random players, he was targeting high-stakes legends. He stole millions from the best in the game while they sat there second-guessing their own abilities, trying to fix leaks that didn't exist. And when he got caught, there was no remorse. In a secretly recorded phone call, Hamilton admitted to everything. His exact words: "I did take this money, and I'm not trying to make it right." Let that sink in. He didn't even try to deny it. Ultimate Bet paid out some refunds, but the real damage was already done. The scandal exposed how easily a poker site could manipulate the game from the inside. It wasn't just about one cheater, it was about an entire system designed to protect him. And while Ultimate Bet was the worst case scenario, it wasn't the only one, because as it turns out, when millions of dollars are at stake, even the biggest poker sites can't always be trusted.
Every time, no matter if it's PLO or no limit hold'em, every time I flop the lowest set, I lose to the bigger set. Every time I flop the biggest set, I lose to a straight. Let's see why I gotta chicken out and not bet. I know what's gonna happen. Now they didn't have anything, but look, every time.
America's Cardroom has spent years trying to convince players it's a legitimate place to play online poker. The problem? Every time they do, another scandal erupts that makes people wonder if they're playing on a poker site or the Wild West. Let's start with the bots. In 2017, high-stakes grinders noticed something strange. Certain accounts were always there, never took breaks, and played an eerily perfect strategy. These weren't just solid regs, these were accounts putting in impossible volume, playing for days straight without fatigue, and adjusting to player tendencies in ways that suggested something far more advanced than a human player with a solver. Accusations flew, but America's Cardroom CEO, Phil Nagy, had a unique response. Instead of promising an investigation, he went on Twitter and dared players to prove that bots were running rampant. It was supposed to be a mic drop moment. Instead, a programmer took him up on the challenge, demonstrating how they had successfully botted on the site for years. Nagy's response? He backpedaled, called the challenge a joke, and deleted the tweets. But that was just the start. Next came the DDoS attacks, huge targeted server crashes that mysteriously happened during their biggest tournaments. Imagine playing for thousands, grinding your way deep, and then, boom, server offline, tournament cancelled, no explanation. Sometimes the games restarted, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes the payouts made sense, sometimes they didn't. It got so bad that even casual players started asking the question, were these attacks really coming from an outside hacker? Or was the site itself pulling the plug when things weren't going their way? And then, just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, players started noticing withdrawals were getting slower. Crypto payouts, once the main selling point of the site, started taking weeks or months. Support tickets went unanswered, accounts went under security review for no clear reason. So let's recap. Bots running rampant, massive mid-tournament crashes, suspicious delays in payouts. That's 3 massive red flags, any one of which would normally kill a poker site's reputation. But somehow, America's Cardroom keeps running, keeps accepting deposits, and keeps getting away with it. And that raises a very simple but very uncomfortable question. If this is just what's been caught, what else is happening behind the scenes? GGPoker has spent years positioning itself as the future of online poker. Massive prize pools, high-profile sponsorships, and an aggressive push to dominate the market. But behind the flashy marketing and record-breaking tournaments, the site has been at the center of multiple cheating scandals, and the way they've handled them raises more questions than answers. The most infamous, Bryn Kenny's alleged cheating stable. In 2022, former poker pro Martin Zamani blew the lid off what he claimed was a highly organized cheating operation run by Kenny, who at one point was poker's all-time money leader. The accusations were outrageous. Players were forced into spiritual coaching, including consulting with shamans, and more importantly, they were allegedly required to collude, share hole cards, and use real-time assistance (RTA) software while playing high stakes on GGPoker. Kenny denied everything, but the poker world wasn't convinced. His alleged stable of players had dominated GGPoker's biggest games, winning millions. If the accusations were true, it wasn't just a case of 1 or 2 players gaining an edge. It was an entire rigged ecosystem where a select few controlled the action while unsuspecting players dumped their bankrolls into a scripted nightmare. And Kenny wasn't the only one. Around the same time, GGPoker banned high-stakes pro Ali Msirovic for using RTA. They also ignored red flags about Fedor Cruz, whose roommates exposed him for running a dream machine, a multi-monitor setup feeding him optimal decisions in real time. It took months for GGPoker to act, despite evidence mounting that top-tier games were infested with real-time solver users. Then came GGPoker's Smart Protection System, a supposed anti-cheating measure, but instead of banning only cheaters, the system started targeting winning players, flagging them as predatory and restricting their accounts. The message was clear: if you win too much, you're a problem. So what's worse, having cheaters run wild or having a site that decides who gets to win? GGPoker scandals raise a disturbing possibility. The future of online poker might not be about skill, luck, or even fairness. It might just be about who the house wants to keep around.
To me is once again, the hero of the story was also cheating. The heroes of poker don't cheat.
Full Tilt Poker wasn't just an online poker site, it was the online poker site. It had the biggest games, the biggest names, and an aura of invincibility that made it feel like a digital Vegas. If PokerStars was corporate and polished, Full Tilt was pure high-stakes adrenaline, a place where legends clashed and railbirds watched in awe. But while players were chasing glory at the tables, the people running Full Tilt were playing a very different kind of game. And it wasn't poker. For years, Full Tilt promised players that their deposits were safe in segregated accounts, funds that belonged to the players and couldn't be touched by the company. That turned out to be a lie. By 2011, Full Tilt had quietly turned into the world's largest Ponzi scheme, using player deposits to cover operating costs, pay executive salaries, and, of course, fund the lavish lifestyles of the site's founders. Then came Black Friday, the day the US Department of Justice shut down major poker sites, freezing accounts and exposing the truth. Players logged in to cash out and found nothing. The once mighty Full Tilt was missing over $350 million, money that players assumed was safely stored, but had, in reality, been burned through long ago. Phil Ivey, Tom Dwan, and other sponsored pros scrambled to distance themselves, but the damage was done. The site collapsed, trust in online poker evaporated overnight, and thousands of players were left wondering if they'd ever see their money again. Eventually, PokerStars bailed out Full Tilt stranded players, buying the company and repaying balances. But the real lesson: if a site as massive as Full Tilt could get away with stealing hundreds of millions for years, what does that say about the security of your bankroll on any online poker site? And Full Tilt wasn't even the biggest case of players being cheated out of their money, because while they at least tried to cover their tracks, another site didn't just steal from players, they did it in plain sight while everyone watched. Cake Poker was never a household name. It wasn't the biggest site, it didn't have the biggest games, and it wasn't backed by poker's biggest stars. But for a while, it was just big enough, attracting enough players to make real money flow and running just under the radar of serious scrutiny. And then, people started noticing something strange. The bad beats weren't just bad, they were statistically impossible. The action was absurdly high, multi-way all-ins were more common than they should have been, and somehow, certain accounts kept running hotter than the sun. Players suspected the worst. The site's random number generator, RNG, was rigged. But here's where it gets interesting. This wasn't just another conspiracy theory about a juiced deck. When an independent audit was finally conducted, it revealed that GGPoker's shuffle had been compromised for months. The site initially brushed off concerns, insisting their software was provably fair. But the deeper investigators dug, the worse things looked. There were irregularities in card distribution that shouldn't have been possible in a truly random game. The patterns didn't match real-world probability. Then came the bombshell. Certain accounts appeared to be benefiting disproportionately, getting stronger hands at an alarming frequency. The numbers weren't just off, they were unexplainable, unless you considered one possibility: someone, somewhere, had control over the deck. GGPoker never fully admitted to the scandal. The site limped along for a few more years before eventually collapsing, leaving many players with unpaid balances and unanswered questions. But the takeaway was clear: if a mid-sized poker site could manipulate the deck itself, what's stopping a bigger site from doing the same? And GGPoker wasn't the only site that had an unusual approach to fairness, because the next scandal, it wasn't just about who got dealt the cards, it was about who was playing them. The idea of a poker bot used to be a joke. Clunky, predictable programs that made the same mechanical decisions over and over. Easy to spot, easy to beat. But by the time PartyPoker uncovered one of the biggest bot scandals in online poker history, those days were long gone. In 2019, PartyPoker announced that it had seized over $734,000 from cheating accounts in just one day. That wasn't just a few bad actors, it was a full-scale invasion. These weren't basic bots playing static preflop ranges, this was an organized operation. The bot runners had developed sophisticated programs that could play multiple tables simultaneously for days on end, slowly grinding away at real players with near-perfect GTO strategy. They weren't trying to crush every session, just enough to stay under the radar while bleeding the ecosystem dry. What made these bots so dangerous was that they didn't play like machines. They adjusted to table dynamics, they changed gears, they varied their timing to avoid detection. Some even mimicked human patterns, taking pauses, making occasional mistakes, just enough to avoid looking suspicious. It worked. For months, these accounts were winning small but consistent amounts across low and mid-stakes games, where scrutiny was low and volume was high. Players assumed they were just facing another group of solid grinders. But in reality, they were battling a network of machines designed to exploit them to the absolute maximum. When PartyPoker finally acted, they didn't just ban the accounts, they seized every last cent and redistributed the funds. It was one of the most aggressive anti-bot crackdowns ever seen in online poker. But here's the real question: if PartyPoker found this many bots in one sweep, how many more are still out there? And more importantly, on how many other sites? Because PartyPoker may have caught their bots, but the next scandal, that one wasn't about who was playing the hands, it was about who was sharing them. Poker is supposed to be a game of incomplete information, where every decision is a mix of strategy, instinct, and calculated risk. But what if someone at your table knew exactly what cards you had? What if they weren't just making good reads, but actually seeing your whole cards in real time? That's exactly what happened on Absolute Poker in 2007, in one of the most brazenly corrupt scandals in online poker history. For months, players noticed something off. A few specific accounts were winning at impossible rates, calling river bluffs with third pair, making absurd folds against monster hands, and playing with an almost supernatural ability to dodge disaster. At first, people assumed it was just another ultra-aggressive sicko on a heater. But then, in one high-stakes tournament, a single mistake blew the whole thing wide open. A player named Potripper had been running over the table, making every correct decision. But when the final hand played out, something strange happened. A player watching the game requested the hand history from Absolute Poker's client. And instead of receiving just his own data, the system accidentally sent a full audit log, one that showed every single hole card at the table. The evidence was undeniable. pot tripper had perfect knowledge of everyone's cards. The logs revealed that an internal account, admin level access, was watching the game in observer mode, feeding information directly to pot tripper in real time. The entire thing had been rigged from the inside. When players confronted Absolute Poker, the site's response was confusing to say the least. First, they denied it. Then, when the evidence became overwhelming, they admitted to a security breach, but insisted it was an isolated incident. But as more hands were analyzed, it became clear. This wasn't a one-time event, it was a system. The fallout was massive. Absolute Poker was forced to issue refunds, but the damage to their reputation was irreversible. The scandal confirmed what many had feared but never proved, that some online poker sites weren't just allowing cheating, they were actively involved in it. And while Absolute Poker collapsed under the weight of its own corruption, it wasn't even the biggest superuser scandal in history, because just when players thought it couldn't get any worse, another site, one even bigger, was about to do the exact same thing on an even larger scale. Online poker has always had a problem with collusion, but the iPoker network scandal in 2018 was something different. This wasn't a couple of players soft playing each other in a cash game. This was a multi-year, multi-country conspiracy that turned online poker into a stacked deck, and most of the victims never even realized they were being cheated. For years, something fell off in mid-stakes tournaments. Certain accounts were dominating with eerie consistency, winning in spots where variance should have balanced things out. These weren't just good players running well, they were always in the right place at the right time. Then, a group of grinders started piecing things together. Players who had never met, never spoken, and supposedly had no connection to each other were making suspiciously coordinated plays, raising in perfect harmony, setting up squeeze spots for each other, and making highly questionable folds in crucial moments. It wasn't until the scandal was fully exposed that the truth became clear. This was a well-organized cheating ring, primarily run by a group of Eastern European players who had been sharing whole card information in real time. How? Private Discord servers, encrypted messaging apps, and advanced multi-accounting techniques that allowed them to manipulate the tournament landscape like a chessboard. The damage was staggering. This ring had been operating for over 2 years, taking millions from unsuspecting players. When iPoker finally took action, dozens of accounts were banned, and a fraction of the stolen money was refunded. But the real question wasn't how much was taken, it was how much cheating still hadn't been caught. Because this wasn't a one-time scandal, it was proof that collusion rings had evolved far beyond the old-school chip-dumping strategies. With modern communication tools and near undetectable teamwork, online poker had become a place where you weren't just playing against one opponent, you were playing against an entire hidden army. In the shadows of online poker, the most dangerous players aren't the ones making fearless bluffs or soul-reading their opponents. They're the ones you don't even know are there, hidden behind multiple accounts, controlling the game from the inside. And in 2021, an underground multi-accounting ring on the winning poker network took this deception to another level. This wasn't some casual account sharing between friends. This was a fully operational network run by former poker pros turned cheaters who had spent years refining the art of multi-accounting. Their method, simple: register multiple accounts in the same tournaments, disguise them with different playing styles, and manipulate the entire game to ensure at least one account made a deep run. Imagine entering a tournament thinking you're battling a field of independent players, but in reality, you're up against a coordinated team where certain accounts soft play each other, others apply maximum pressure, and some are simply there to feed chips to their stronger counterparts. It's like playing chess against someone who controls half the board and you don't even know it. This ring wasn't just profitable, it was devastating. Over 18 months, they extracted more than $1.8 million from unsuspecting players, and because each account appeared unrelated, they stayed under the radar for far longer than most cheaters. But eventually, their greed caught up with them. Suspicious patterns emerged, unusual late-game folding, accounts that never seemed to clash with each other in crucial spots, and final tables where the same random players always ended up together. Investigators dug deeper, tracing IP addresses, tracking transfer histories, and eventually connecting the dots. When the scandal broke, dozens of accounts were permanently banned and the network crumbled. But here's the real question: how many others are still out there? Because while one cheating ring got exposed, the reality is this: as long as online poker exists, the game will always have ghosts. And speaking of deception, the next scandal didn't just involve a group of players, it involved an entire poker site, accused of rigging its own games to squeeze as much money out of players as possible. For years, poker players have debated one fundamental question: is online poker beatable long term? Well, in the case of Russian bot farms, the answer was a resounding yes, as long as you weren't human. This wasn't some hobbyist running a single bot on low stakes. This was a full-scale, industrialized operation where dozens, possibly hundreds, of AI-driven poker bots ran on multiple sites, grinding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The people behind it weren't just trying to win. They were systematically draining the poker ecosystem, extracting money with near-perfect efficiency. At first, the bots were rudimentary, basic decision trees and pre-programmed lines. But as the years went on, their strategy evolved. By the late 2010s, these bots were using solvers in real time, analyzing every hand to find the most profitable play. They adjusted to table dynamics, balanced their ranges, and even mimicked human tendencies to avoid detection. Some were so advanced that they could intentionally make small mistakes, just to seem more realistic. The biggest leak came when PokerStars banned a ring of Russian PLO bots that had quietly amassed over $1.5 million before anyone noticed. But that was just one operation. Reports surfaced of even more bots across sites like Winning Poker Network, PartyPoker, and 888 Poker, many of them running for years before getting caught. And the scariest part? Some never got caught at all. Because while a few of these bot farms were exposed, there's no telling how many are still operating. Online poker isn't just about playing against humans anymore. It's about figuring out whether the guy free betting you every hand is actually a guy. And if you thought bots were the biggest threat to online poker's integrity, just wait, because some players believe the entire deck was rigged against them. Ask any long-time online poker player and you'll hear the same complaint: PokerStars is rigged. Of course, most of these claims come from people who don't understand variance, but in the early 2010s, the accusations weren't just from bad players on losing streaks. They were from seasoned pros who noticed something strange about the way the cards were falling. The biggest allegation: PokerStars' random number generator, RNG, wasn't truly random. Instead of dealing hands based purely on probability, skeptics believed the site manipulated the deck to create more action, favoring big all-ins and wild multi-way pots to drive up the rake. The theory had some compelling points. Players analyzed millions of hand histories and claimed that statistically improbable bad beats were happening far too often.
I should mention that ruminating on this kind of stuff really doesn't help at all. You'll see all over the internet, there's a lot of people that just think everything's rigged and everything. They're, very superstitious about a lot of stuff. And I will say that those people have lost the game already.
Pocket aces cracked by pocket kings way more than expected. Runner miracles appearing at suspiciously high frequencies. The response from PokerStars? A hard denial. They pointed to multiple independent audits verifying that their shuffle was fair. And to be fair, most legitimate tests found no concrete proof of rigging. But then, something strange happened. In 2008, Absolute Poker was caught red-handed manipulating hands. In 2011, Cake Poker's RNG was exposed for favoring certain accounts. Suddenly, the conspiracy theorists didn't seem so crazy anymore. While PokerStars was never proven to have a rigged deck, the debate never really died. Some still believe the site's algorithm creates action-heavy spots to maximize profits. Others dismiss it as tinfoil hat nonsense. But one thing's for sure, whether it's bots, superusers, or potentially rigged RNGs, online poker has given players plenty of reasons to doubt what they're seeing. And that's before we even get into poker sites that straight up lied to their players' faces. Lock Poker wasn't just a scam site, it was a masterclass in deception, running multiple frauds at once before eventually disappearing with millions in player funds. And while most people remember Lock Poker for its outright theft, one of its earlier scandals was its fake rakeback system, which tricked grinders into playing on the site under false promises. At the time, rakeback was a huge deal. If you were a serious player, getting the right deal could be the difference between barely breaking even and making serious money. Most sites capped rakeback at 35%, but in 2011, Lock Poker made an irresistible offer, up to 55% rakeback, a number that blew every competitor out of the water. The only problem? It was a lie. Lock Poker never had the money to pay out these rakeback deals. When the first payments were due in May 2011, players were left waiting for months. Eventually, Lock Poker started making small payouts, but with a massive catch. To actually withdraw the money, players had to wager up to 160 times the rakeback amount in the site's casino games, where the house edge made it virtually impossible to cash out. Even worse, The rakeback itself was sticky, meaning that if you somehow completed the playthrough requirements, you could only withdraw the winnings, not the actual bonus. In other words, the whole thing was a giant scam designed to trap players in an unwinnable system. It worked. Players flocked to Lock Poker for the too good to be true rakeback deals, only to realize they'd been completely duped. And while the rakeback fraud was bad, it was only the beginning. Because Lock Poker wasn't just cheating players out of rakeback. Soon, they were stealing their entire bankrolls. And that's where the real damage began.